So when I got here and I started trying to write some logic, I realized I didn't distinguish my fields, right? So I need to go back to my schema now and promote my fields. So I'll do part of that on the video and part of it off the video. So here we have our inventory request, and I need to do a promote, and I will do a distinguish field here. So I just need to add these two fields, and then I'll do the same thing on the response. Rebuild the project, and so on. Okay, just as a reminder, in case it hasn't soaked into you yet, when you do a distinguish field, all it's doing is basically the XPath for you behind the scenes. So when you distinguish the field right here, you see the XPath for that field. Okay? Then, when you go back to your logic right here, instead of having to say XPath message so-and-so and then type in a very long XPath like this, you simply say message inventory request dot, and then you get the promoted fields. So I'm going to write some logic here to pretend to check a database and tell us if we're in stock or not. Okay, so I've created my code here. I'm going to set the is in stock to false, and I'm only going to let it be true in two cases. If it's one of these two product numbers and the quantity is less than 10, then we're going to set it to true. Now you notice that right now all the in stocks, I have a red squiggly under them, and it says that you can only do this in a construct block. Okay? So what I did here by mistake is I put an expression. So what we're going to have to do is a map and a construct here. So we're going to do a transform, and then here we're going to have to build the output message, which will be a response. And here we'll make a quick little map called map inventory request to inventory response. The source will be the request. The destination will be the response. The little box is checked down here, so when I click OK, it will open the mapper utility. And in the mapper utility, I'll map part number to part number, quantity to quantity, and then I'll use the concatenate functoid to set this little variable to false, because it is a Boolean. And I'll close that map. And so now I need to insert here the other shape, a message assignment, and then all the code that I put in the expression shape I need to remove from there and paste it in here. And now I can delete the expression shape. So now all the kind of the fake logic that we were talking about is we do a map, and then we right here we set it to false again just to be sure, and then we say only for this product and this product, if it's less than 10, then the in stock is set to true. And then now at the end, what do we have? Okay, we need a port now for the in and the out here. So part of the, actually before I continue, let me put some descriptions right here. Okay, so it's a little more readable. I call this build message inventory response, map request to response, and fake inventory logic. You also notice when you put your cursor over some of these shapes, it will give you the code inside of that shape in this big pop-up tooltip type thing. So now we need to add our ports to both receive and to send back. And we'll say new configured port, and we will call this port inventory request. The only difference here is this is port type. And everything is the same here. And here you'll be receiving. And now this is the first time we've ever done direct binding. So instead of specify now, specify later, we click direct. And it says here, routing between ports will be defined by filter expressions on incoming messages in the message box database. And that is correct. You can also do self-correlating, and you can do this one to receive messages from another orchestration, select this port. Anyway, that's a little more complicated. So we're going to do the simple routing, and we're going to have to define a filter. So click next here, and then finish. And then you you'll be able to connect these like normal. And then we're going to do the same thing on the tail end here. We're going to send a message back using direct binding. So if that was port inventory request, this will be port inventory response, port type inventory response, and this will be a send, and it will be direct binding. Just take the default again there. Okay, so we have a simple little request response orchestration, very similar to what a web service would be. Now, what we need to do is on our receive, in the past we learned that the first receive in orchestration had to be the activating receive, and we usually set this message from false to true. But in this case we don't. Instead, we're going to use a filter. Okay, I take back what I just said. It is still an activating receive. So you notice the word filter doesn't appear here unless you make it an activating receive. And now you have this thing here called filter expression. So filter expression is really only used when you use direct binding. If you click on it here in the property window, you get a little bit of a help at the bottom. It says indicates the filter criteria applied to the properties of incoming messages. Only messages that fulfill this criteria are received. Now the question is, do I need a filter or not? And I don't think I do in this scenario. One of the last projects I was on, we used a message called a trigger to start all our orchestrations, and we used the same trigger. So what we had to do in that case was we went to the filter expression, and then this is very similar to creating a subscription like we did in our send ports. And so right here we would have a promoted field on our trigger that was called something like orchestration name or start orchestration. And then here we would say, well, I only want to start this orchestration when the trigger itself had a value of whatever my orchestration name was. And when you're in the filter here, you do put this in quotes, whereas in a send port you do not put quotes on these values. So that's a big difference, because here this is, I think, going to get compiled into C#, whereas in the send port it doesn't really get compiled, and that's why you have to put quotes here but not in the regular send port. So in my scenario that I just kind of developed here, we're sending this message called port inventory request, and nobody else is really wanting to receive it except my orchestration. So I don't think we're going to need to have a filter here. So now, how do we call this orchestration from our main orchestration? So we're going to go back to the main guy, which was Orch PO demo. And here was our loop where we're waiting to put in some call logic here. Okay, so now here, oops, inside our call logic, we need to have a send and a receive. So we're going to do send followed by receive. And we're basically going to be, oops, I did the wrong one there. We're basically going to be sending the request out and getting the response back from our other orchestration. And so now we have to build here or construct the send. Every time you have a new message, we have to construct it. So the other thing we can do here, just to save a wee bit of time, is we're going to go to our new orchestration. Let me close a few of these windows off the video. Okay, so now I have only maybe 5 or 6 files open instead of all the ones I had open before. Okay, so here's our inventory checker orchestration. Let's go there and let's copy these two messages. Unfortunately, you cannot hold down the shift key and copy them both at the same time. That would be nice, but you got to copy them one at a time. So we're going to copy the first message, and we're going to go back to PO demo and go up to messages, and we're going to paste. Then we're going to go back to our inventory checker, copy our second message, go back to our main orchestration, go to messages, and paste. Okay, so now this message on the send needs to be the request for the inventory. And then the receive needs to be the other way around. Receive the response. So here we pick inventory, message inventory response. So over here we're going to have to do our direct binding again. So we're going to configure the ports basically the exact same way. Port, inventory request. And we're going to be sending to the request, and that will be direct binding. Now when you add a new port, sometimes it puts it at the bottom and not where you really want it. So we're going to scroll up here and then drop it closer to our shape where we're actually going to be doing it. And then we're going to do it again with the other port. Port inventory response, port type inventory response. This will be a receive and it will be a direct bind. We have to move it up now, about right there, and join it here. Okay, now, so if we just sit back for a minute and think about this, we could have a flat file here, right? Where we could send to a flat file, and then the other orchestration could receive from the flat file, and then it could send to a flat file, and then here we could receive from a flat file. But the whole point of direct binding is basically we don't have to set up all these little flat file directories on the hard disk. Instead, we're sending the message to the message box database, which is built into BizTalk, and then it follows the publish subscriber pub sub model, and when I send this message to the database, it immediately publishes it to any orchestrations interested in that message, and then that orchestration runs, and when it's done it sends the response back to the message box, and then my orchestration is waiting to hear back on that same message. Now when we do this, we're also going to need correlation, which we briefly talked about in a prior video. So I have to stop for a minute now and think about, do I already have fields that I can correlate on or not? So let's go back to my inventory request response. And so all I have here are these two numbers. And so the question would be, what would happen if more than one person sent the same request with the same two numbers? Is it possible the system would get mixed up? And as long as part number and quantity, well, they are sort of unique, but I guess there is a situation, kind of like a race condition, where maybe two different people were calling the orchestration at the same time, and the first guy that got there, he would get that quantity, and then the second guy wouldn't. And so in that case, it would be important that the two orchestrations didn't get the same message back. So we're going to have to refactor our little request response here one more time in order to do a good correlation. So in my request and my response, I'm going to add a new field here, and I'm going to call it, I'm just going to call it correlation GUID. The only purpose it's there is to do correlation. And now it needs to be a fully promoted field, not just a distinguished field. So I'm going to do the quick promotion on it. And now we're going to add the same field here to our PO inventory response. Oops, paste isn't there, so I got to do it again. Insert child attribute. Oops, wrong place. Correlation GUID, and we do right click, quick promote. Okay, so now if we look at the promotions over here under show promotions, we can see part number, quantity, stock, and so on are distinguished fields, and correlation GUID is the only fully promoted field. And fully promoted fields, you will recall hopefully, all go into the property schema. so there's our field called correlation GUID, and of course it will be a string. So I'm going to go off the video and I'm going to rebuild the schema project again and refresh it into the orchestration. So I've done that, and now I'm back, and we're going to have to change our map right here. So we're going to add that new field in our map. So the correlation GUID will have to be copied across as well. And I'm going to go ahead and pause or end this video now, and we will continue in the next video, just leaving off where we left off here.